Hey everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us for this Women in Global Health Georgia chapter event. I'm Rachel Hall-Clifford. I'm co-chair of our chapter, and I am delighted to be having this event today entitled Take Your Own Elephant, 10 Tips on Effective Advocacy. We are joined for this presentation by Anne Keeling, who has had a 40-year career in global health and social development. She has held the post of Head of Gender Equality Policy within the UK government, and she is currently the chair of the NGO Age International, as well as Senior Fellow of Women in Global Health. Anne has been CEO of 2 global health NGOs, was UNFPA country representative in Pakistan, and director of the Commonwealth Secretariat leading on health, education, and gender. She's also been CEO of the International Diabetes Federation, and as chair led the successful campaign for the 2011 UN High-Level Summit on Non-Communicable Diseases as a part of that work. So she has also spent 9 years in Pakistan with the British Council, DFID, and UNDP working on human development and women's rights. So certainly this wealth of experience, has led to, many insights on advocacy, and we are fortunate to be able to learn from her today. So Anne, I will let you take it away. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Rachel, and thanks for inviting me. As Rachel said, in 2008, I was the head of the International Diabetes Federation, and I realized that there was an absolute tsunami of non-communicable diseases hitting the world, and I wanted to do something about it because it just wasn't on the global health and development agenda. And in 2009, I formed the NCD Alliance, and we campaigned successfully to get the first high-level meeting on non-communicable diseases, and I think, as people say, and the rest is history. So I want to share some tips that I learned along the way about being a woman leader in global health and about global advocacy. So my first point is really what's advocacy. When I'm talking about advocacy, I'm talking about a call to change from the voice of those who want change plus evidence. And for me, that's what you need to put together to form advocacy. To the 10 tips that I'm going to leave you with today. Rule number 1 is be clear what you want. I think we quite often find that people have great ideas and yet they're unable to put them into an elevator pitch. It is essential. Perfect your script, make it short, make it simple, and make it sharp. Make sure that you've got the right evidence for the audience that you're addressing. So if you're talking to a global audience, have global evidence. If you're talking to a national decision maker, then clearly have evidence from that country. It's whatever evidence is relevant and will be compelling. And train your team. Make sure that everybody in your organization, in your coalition, knows what the message is and can present it. And I think finally, I would say, don't only present the problem. It's a very simple mistake to keep talking about the problem, but you have to put solutions. You have to tell policymakers that there's something that can be done about the problem that you're raising. And basically, as Einstein said, if you can't explain it simply, you just don't understand it well enough. My second point is identify where power lies. When we went into the NCD Alliance, we did a very careful and deliberate stakeholder mapping and power analysis. We wanted to work out really where does power lie, and it doesn't always lie where you think it might be or where it seems to be. For example, on non-communicable diseases, the real drivers of change were not the high-income countries. It wasn't donors, and it wasn't WHO. It was low-income countries, and it was countries particularly from the Caribbean. So here's an example of the sort of mapping tool that you can use to map power and stakeholders. Number 3, consider what it is that will move a decision maker. What will make that particular decision maker change their mind in favor of what you're saying? What I'm saying here, my top point here, is that you have to make appeals to the head, to the heart, and the pocket, depending on who you're talking to. And you need to be able to vary your argument, looking at all those 3 things. If you're talking to politicians, remember that politicians are really primarily interested in votes. That cartoon I've got at the bottom is me. When I was head of gender equality for the UK government in 2008, we were literally told to weigh the mail on a particular issue and look at the type of mail that was coming in. And issues would come to the top of the political agenda depending on the weight of the mail. And we were also looking at what sort of mail is it? Is it duplicate letters, standard letters that maybe 1,000 people were sending, or were they individual letters that people were taking the time to write? Letters, emails, whatever it was. And those individual letters and messages counted far more than anything that was standard. And the weight of the mail was important because my boss, the minister, was interested in votes, and that's how it goes. Remember that you can always play on rivalry, particularly between countries. You can persuade one country by telling them that their neighbouring country is doing better than them, etc. I worked for nearly a decade in Pakistan, and one of the things I learned to get up to speed on was cricket. As a woman in Pakistan, I was told when I arrived in Pakistan in 1989 that no man in the government or the bureaucracy would work with me, that nobody would talk to me, and that was certainly true when I first arrived. And so what I learned to do was to learn about cricket. I worked out the cricket scores so that if there was a silence in a meeting, I could always come in with the latest cricket scores. I know nothing about cricket, but I pretty soon learnt. And it's all about building relationships. It's going to be very hard to persuade anybody that you don't have some sort of relationship with. Number 4, find your allies. Absolutely critical. Find your tribe. Find the people who are like you, they think like you, they've got similar values, they have integrity, because you can share resources with those people and you can amplify your voice. You can also share your sorrows and your successes. I think all of us, when we're working on advocacy, it can be a very lonely place to be, especially as a leader and a woman, and you need those people to lean on. When you're working with allies, focus on what you have in common, and ignore the rest. When we were forming the NCD Alliance, what I did was put together an alliance of disease-focused organizations in diabetes, in cardiovascular disease, cancer, lung disease, that had previously been competitors for space in the global discourse. But what we did was forge a common agenda of 5 things that we were going for and that we were going for together. And we worked on a twin track approach. So we all had our own disease specific, agendas, goals, work that we were doing. But we had 5 things together that were very clear, that we were campaigning for as the NCD Alliance. And one of those things was that UN high-level meeting in 2011 on NCDs. Don't dismiss unlikely allies. I can say in Pakistan that I've worked with as allies with some highly conservative people that I think at times I would have thought would have nothing in common with what I wanted and what I was campaigning for. But work out what the issue is, because you may not have a whole life story, a whole agenda, in common with people, but it may be that the one thing that you're working on, if it's education, it can be mobility, it can be transport, that you do have something in common and you can be allies. Just an example of Women in Global Health work in 2019. In the lead up to the first high-level meeting at the UN on universal health coverage, we felt as Women in Global Health that we were really not getting traction on the mainstreaming of gender equality into UHC, and we were very concerned. 6 months before that meeting, we had sat in consultative meetings, we'd made our points, we'd written, we'd provided evidence, and yet it seemed that what we were asking for just never came through. And what you've got down the left-hand side, UHC 2030, which was the voice of the UHC movement, produced 6 key asks in the lead up to the high-level meeting on universal health coverage. These were 6 asks that were going to member states and decision makers, and gender wasn't there. So in addition to their 6 asks, Women in Global Health wrote a 7th ask, which was on gender equality and women's rights as women's rights as drivers of health. And we went out everywhere on social media and in meetings with the 7th ask. In March, we issued our 7th ask. That was March 2019. The high-level meeting was in September. In April, we formed an alliance for gender equality and UHC with Women Deliver and the International Women's Health Coalition. And at that point, there were 60 of us, 60 NGOs, all getting behind this 7th ask, but all advocating for women's rights and gender equality as we came up to the high-level meeting. In September, at the high-level meeting, we flooded the high-level meeting with the 7th ask, to the point where UHC 2030 decision makers asked us to, desist and stop, because they said that everybody knows your 7th ask, but nobody knows our first 6 asks. The output from that high-level meeting on UHC was one of the strongest political declarations that I've ever seen on gender equality. There are some very, very strong commitments in there. And I'm absolutely sure that they would not be in there if we hadn't done the work that we did with that Alliance for Gender Equality and UHC. By December 2019, UHC 2030 produced 7 messages, and you see the 7th message there on your right-hand side in yellow and black, and that was about gender equality and women's rights. Number 5, know your enemy, your frenemies, and dinosaurs. Identify your competition. If you are successful, you will have competition. Expect enemies. It's a tough world out there. It's rather sad that I have to say this, but you will have enemies, and you will have people that look like enemies that are actually friends, and vice versa. You will have people who imitate you. If you're successful, people will copy what you do. People will claim your success. And I think that happens particularly to women of color, and to younger people. I'm amazed at how many people claim to have founded the NCD Alliance when they weren't even there. And a couple of times I've actually taken it up with people who have written that they founded the NCD Alliance, and I've actually said, well, but you weren't even there at the time. It's good to expect enemies and imitators, because it's easier to deal with if you are expecting you're not taken by surprise. And then finally, don't waste time on dinosaurs. Whatever you're doing, there are going to be a minority of people that you simply can't convince. Don't waste time trying to convince them. Work out who the dinosaurs are and work out how you are going to get around them and outmaneuver them. Number 6, prepare for meetings. This is very, very important. Before you go into an advocacy meeting, research the people who are going to be there, research their organization. What do they do? Who's on their board? What do they fund? What's important to them? Research the processes that you're engaged with. Learn about UN global processes, for example. Find out exactly how they work. Before you go into a meeting, prepare a script. Have talking points, know what your asks are, and defensive briefings. Know as a team what you're going to answer to the questions that you would rather not be asked. Send your bios, the bios of the people on your side, and other information in advance, so you maximize the time that you've actually got to talk to those people and to listen. Keep track of time. Senior people are very busy and they simply hate it if you go over time. Follow up on meetings and follow up immediately, and be opportunistic, because you never know who you're going to meet or how they can help your cause. Number 7, be innovative, bold, and above all, be memorable. You want people to remember you. Use theatre and be creative. When I was campaigning on NCDs, I was thrown out of just about everywhere that I went in, which was a big surprise to me, because I'd held a very senior career and I wasn't used to being thrown out of anywhere. I was thrown out of WHO, I was thrown out of donor agencies, and I was thrown out of the EU. Just a few months before the UN high-level meeting on NCDs, the EU was holding their annual 2010 EU Development Days. And that's about a three-day meeting, all sorts of development topics. I fought hard to get NCDs onto the agenda of that meeting, and I failed. So I turned up to the meeting and I took my elephant. And this was my elephant. Here's a picture. And it was one of our interns wearing an elephant suit. It was extremely hot. We had to change the interns because it was so heavy and so difficult. But she came with me everywhere. We went in and out of all the rooms, saying, you know, with the message, don't ignore the elephant in the room. And that was NCDs. The picture of our elephant actually ended up in the report of that meeting. So I know that we were noticed. Take the stage. This is something that I saw Rupa Dat do in 2019 at the high-level meeting in UHC. We weren't being called. Civil society wasn't being asked to speak. We were sitting in the balcony, and Rupa said, "You know, look, I think I'm just going to go down and get on the stage." And I said, "Okay, off you go." So off she went. Stood at the side of the stage until she was offered a microphone, and then she spoke. You have to be bold. You have to take chances. I have found when I've been to meetings, if there's no chair for me at the table, that maybe there's a chair somewhere else, I will get a chair and take it to the table and say, right, okay, I'm here. I'll tell you a story. One of the most memorable advocacy pieces of theatre that I think I've ever seen. I have never forgotten it, and I'm sure that no one else who was there forgot it either. This is 2005. I was heading the UK delegation to a regional follow-up meeting. It was the 10-year anniversary of the 1995 Beijing Women's Conference, and we were negotiating in Mexico on a regional agreement 10 years after Beijing, and that was the region was the Americas region and Caribbean. George Bush was president, and I think he sent the most aggressive and bullying US ambassador to those talks that I have ever seen. She was aggressive. She was openly bullying, and she openly threatened Central American states that their aid would be cut if they didn't support US policy against sexual and reproductive health and rights. It was a very, very difficult meeting. It ended in chaos and disarray. As we left the negotiating room, at the end of the meeting, a group of NGOs from Central America approached the US ambassador with a beautiful basket. It was absolutely stunning. And they said, we have a gift for you. And she smiled and she took it. And that was the first time I think we'd seen her smile in the 3 days that we'd been there. And then she realized that that beautiful basket was full of very small coins. And the NGOs said to her, here is your aid. We won't trade women's rights for your small change. That's the sort of thing that gets you remembered. Tip number 8, don't give up. When things don't go in a straight line, find other ways to get where you want to get to. You can change the plan. Don't change the vision or the goal. Remember that advocacy is long-term. It's very unlikely that the things that you want to achieve are going to happen in the short term. If they're worth fighting for, they're going to take time. You have to expect resistance and setbacks. There's a reason why you're fighting for change and why change hasn't happened. And you have to see that a backlash, although it's infuriating and it's demoralizing, a backlash is actually the sign that you're succeeding. So in a way, we have to welcome a backlash when we see a backlash against the things that we're fighting for. It suggests that we're actually making change. And when things get really bad, remember that the best revenge that you have is massive success. And that occurred to me. So in 2009, when I went to WHO to campaign for NCDs, I was very surprised to be shown the door and to be told that what I was trying to do was just a massive distraction from global health priorities, which were infectious disease and the Millennium Development Goals. That's 2009. 2014, I arrived in Pakistan as the country rep for UNFPA, took up my new job, and the second day I was there, the WHO representative came to brief me, and he came to brief me on the importance of NCDs. And I had to tell him that, well, you guys have come a long way in 5 years, but the best revenge is massive success. Tip number 9, monitor, record, and learn. Document everything. Start with an advocacy plan, monitor it and adjust it. It's easy to forget what happens along the way, and afterwards it's going to be important that everything is recorded so you know the steps that you took. Attributing impact can be very complex, especially when you're working with partners and with governments. You may be working with governments behind the scene. You may have, for example, drafted language that governments accepted, and yet you can't attribute that to your success. So a lot of attributing impact is quite complex, and it's sensitive when you're working with others. Keep records. The impact that you've been pushing for may come a long time after you've gone. And I can certainly say that with NCDs, some of the things that I started actually came through 10 years after I started them. So it's really, really important to understand that advocacy and impact can be long-term. And it's important to document so that other people can learn from your experiences. You know, we learn from what others do, and they can learn from us. And we have Gandhi here at the bottom saying, you know, you may never know what results come of your action, but if you do nothing, there will be no result. Point number 10. I want to share with you some simple hacks for advocacy, and it's really important that women particularly exchange advice and tips on simple things that we can do to overcome some of the resistance that we will face, that we will get as women. I'd like to hear some of yours, but just here's a few of mine. You will get microaggressions. You have to expect microaggressions. They come in all shapes and sizes. It's hard sometimes to think of exactly what to say at the time. But what I've learned to do is just flip it around. So if a man says to me, in a very patronizing way, I love your dress, I'll say, well, I love your socks. If he says, well, who's looking after your children today? I'll ask him, who's looking after yours? It's a very simple way of just, flipping around a microaggression so that people understand that it's a microaggression, and you're simply not gonna take it. You haven't been rude, you haven't been impolite, and yet you've turned it round. When you're at an important meeting, try and sit yourself opposite the most important person in the room. Make sure that person can see you, that they have eye contact with you. Don't sit at the side, sit opposite. If a man starts talking over you in a meeting, keep talking. They give up eventually. It may take a long time and you may think they won't give up, but just carry on. And I promise you, they give up eventually. When you go into a big meeting, be the first person to ask a question. Sometimes we sit there and we wait and we think, okay, well, let somebody else go first. And then you run out of time. Be the first person to ask a question. Take your question with you. Make it short and make it memorable. And then finally, be seen. And one of my top tips was, go to a meeting in a red jacket, so that when you're in a big meeting and there's a moderator and a panel and they're looking for someone to ask a question, and you stand up, it's easy for them to say, okay, question the woman in the red jacket, or the woman with the blue hair, or whatever, but make yourself identifiable so that people can see you, and it's easy to pick you out. Okay, that's all I have to say today. Keep learning, because I always do, and thank you, and I really look forward to hearing your tips on advocacy. Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Anne, for this just treasure trove of experience and knowledge that you've shared with us. I invite everyone to click back away from the online shopping for a red blazer that you may currently be doing, and pop a question in the question box for Anne. We have one great one here already. The person asked, sometimes advocacy work becomes exhausting and might feel like you against the world. What keeps you going?
I think it's well, I would say three things. I have a picture in my mind of the woman whose life I most want to influence. So I met that woman very early on in a very, very remote village in Pakistan. I keep that woman in my head, and when I think that it's tough, I just think, right, okay, well, I know what it is I'm working for. So always know, what it is you're working for, and if it helps you to have a picture of the person that you're working for to be able to visualize that, then do that. I think a second thing is to really feel committed to the cause that you're working for. That will keep you going. And then the third thing is to have comrades and allies, as I said, people that you can share your sorrows and your successes with. That's incredibly important to me, that I've been able to have allies, mostly women along the way, not all women, certainly not all women, but yeah, and those are the people that stay with you also for the rest of your life. So the people that you've worked shoulder to shoulder with will definitely be friends for life.
Wonderful, thank you. Here, this kind of reminds me of some conversations we've been having within the Women in Global Health Georgia chapter, which is thinking about women and failures, and how too often we see men more able to fail forward, perhaps, than women who may make missteps, as we all do. So you mentioned in your tips that success is, the best form of revenge. But I wondered if you could share, perhaps an example or some thoughts on, failures or a failure across your career, and how that ultimately shaped the landscape and sort of what your steps were to move past that failure.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't know if it was my failure. I'm not going to say it was my failure. Maybe it was in many respects, but having done all this in NCDs and having taken NCDs with a group of committed people and put NCDs onto the global health agenda, and having been, I think, successful in every possible indicator that that I could have been as the CEO of the International Diabetes Federation, I was fired. And I was fired because there was conflict on the board, and there was nothing that I could have done. I don't believe I could have done anything differently to have brought the two sides of the board together. They were simply in conflict, and I was collateral damage. And that was extremely hard. I think it was extremely hard to be fired in a way at the top of my game, when I think I've been better at my job than I've been. I was better at that job than any other job that I've done. And what I did at that point was just step back and say, right, okay, this has happened, but I'm not going to define my last 4 years by this failure. I am not going to define my last 4 years with NCDs and diabetes as a failure because it ended up with me being fired and losing my job. I am going to define my 4 years by what we achieved, and I'm going to remember the extraordinary things that we did and that we achieved. And that was how I remember it. That's very, very important, I think, to be able to define your terms when you fail, and we all do, when you fall, to be able to define your terms and say, right, okay, these are my terms, and I'm now going to stand up and walk on. So I think all of us need to understand that we will fail. And that as women, we're far more likely to be tripped up than our male counterparts. And we have to learn how to fall, and we have to learn how to get up. And having those allies with me, those people who'd been with me in the movement, also helped me, I think, very much helped me stand up and walk.
Absolutely, Anne, thank you. I think having the allies that know the truth of situations, as well as know your heart and what you've put in, lifts us all up. There's a great follow-on question here about how do you keep your mental health or a good state of mind when you receive critiques in person or online about gender equity. So kind of building on the sort of maybe women are more likely to be tripped up, how can we stay in a good, healthy mental space with these critiques?
I think we have to remember how far we've come. And for me, my grandmother left school at 12, and my mother left school at 13. My grandmother couldn't vote. She didn't have the vote till she was in her 50s. So I remember how far we've come. I remember that we stand on the shoulders of some very giant women. And we don't know their names very often. We don't know the names, but we're part of a process, and it's for us to have broad shoulders for other women to stand on and go forward. And I think it's a way of stepping back and seeing yourself in a much bigger picture. That you are important, but you're just part of this much bigger picture. And I found that helps me. It also helps me to have very good, supportive friends and family around, and to have something else to do. Something goes badly wrong at work as it has done so many times, to really to be able to get away from that and do something else is important.
Thank you. I think this brings to mind also some of the other kinds of perhaps occasionally more formal support that we might have across our careers. In the Women in Global Health Georgia chapter, we've been thinking a lot lately about mentorship and the newer term perhaps of sponsorship and how we can facilitate that through our chapter. And certainly for myself, as I move more into a mid-career phase, one of the hugest pleasures is being able to support, women who are in earlier phases. But I find that for myself, I still really need guidance and seek mentorship. So I wondered if you could speak a little bit towards your experiences on both sides of, mentorship experiences across your career.
Yeah. I guess when I was starting out, I was working in the UK government. I was working in development agencies. There were almost no women in senior roles, so there was nobody. There were no women to be mentors to other women. I started my career in the UK Foreign Service, and the reason there were no women was that until the 1960s, when women married, they were forced to resign. And I think it's really, really important that we remember why women are not there. It's women were not there, and they're not there now in leadership positions, not because they opted out, but because they never had a chance to be there. So by the time I came into the UK Foreign Service, I think there were no women ambassadors, and there were no women to be mentors for younger women. We had to work it out for ourselves. And I'm absolutely delighted that that's not the case now. I think it's a fantastic advantage that early career women now have got some role models, and I hope that the women in senior roles will find the time to be mentors for other women. It's something that I've done deliberately all the way through my career. I've had to fight for things like maternity leave and all sorts of things. The first time I went to Pakistan in 1989 with the UK government, I went with an 8-week-old baby, and then went home in the middle of that posting and had another one, and went back to Pakistan when he was 10 weeks. And it had never been done before, and the system just didn't know what to do with a woman who was on maternity leave. The whole system just completely broke down, and I was told that I couldn't have maternity leave, but I could take my annual leave, and I could do that instead. So that's why I went back to work with an 8-week-old baby. But I made sure that if I was going to fight for something, I was going to fight for it for the women that came after me. So I wasn't just going to leave that and say, right, okay, that's what's happened to me. So I made sure that I fought those battles for other women, and wherever I've been, I've tried to make sure that I extend the ladder down to other women, to make sure that there are other women who are going to be coming after me, because with all these things, you want to be sure that your legacy and the things that you fought for are not just going to disappear. So if you're a sensible feminist, you want a pipeline of women coming behind you to consolidate and expand some of the things that you fought for. So that's always been a very important principle for me.
Absolutely. We have a good follow-up question here from Emily. She asks, how do you get your foot in the door as a young woman? I feel we are often not taken seriously, even if our ideas and advocacy are well structured.
Yeah. So I think there are there's two parts to that. Is that how do you get that first job? And I think that this is where networks like Women in Global Health are very, very important, because so many of the jobs that are out there actually are not recruited fairly, and young men are sponsored into those jobs. That happens at all levels. And jobs aren't even properly advertised, or if they're advertised, it's not a true advertisement, not a true competition. So I think it's very important that we look out for each other, and that we form networks that will tell us what opportunities are coming up. And I think that's important, that we have an opportunity to get some experience. Women in Global Health, I think, does enable us to do that. So I think these networks are very important.
Absolutely, Anne. I agree with that. I was really delighted a week or two ago to be on a panel at the American Public Health Association meetings. And frankly, I was a little nervous, and I got on, and a colleague that I knew through Women in Global Health was also on the back end. And I just felt more at home, more supported, and kind of moving into that panel. And I think that just knowing who your allies are and building networks is such a big step, certainly early in career phases, but then across our career spans. There's another question here that kind of goes back to one of the earlier tips in the presentation. Katie asks, how do you balance tough partnerships with advocacy goals?
I think you have to do it by trying to leave your ego at the door, and that's not always easy. It is very difficult sometimes dealing with people who have large egos, and don't leave them at the door. But I think you need to do that and stand back a bit and work out why you're in a partnership with this person. I think that will be the first thing. And if you don't need to be in a partnership with the person, then get them out of your life. But if you do, then I think it's a question of being very honest with them. I would always tell somebody in a partnership if they were making people feel uncomfortable, if they were disruptive, I wouldn't just leave it and let it go. That doesn't always make you popular, but I think it's important, if you're in a partnership, to really set the standards of behavior, and tell others what those standards are. Ask other people to keep you accountable. If you step over the standards that are agreed, and sometimes we all do that, but also have a culture where people can remind others what the rules are and what the standards are.
I think that's incredibly helpful, Anne, because oftentimes as women, culturally, we're trained to prioritize being nice.
Yeah.
And being nice doesn't always in the long term, do the best for relationship building. And I think that, our instinct perhaps is that if we're just nice, things will work out in the end. But learning to have those difficult conversations in a way that enables the relationships to continue to grow and flourish, it's hard, but so important, as you highlight here. Kind of further along those lines, you mentioned in terms of advocacy that you have to appeal to head, heart, and pocket. And I was very struck by that in the presentation. And I wondered if you could, maybe provide us just a little bit more detail on how you tailor pitches to head, heart, and pocket. Should it always involve all three of those things? Does that vary? You mentioned a bit on how that might vary by audience, but I wondered if we could kind of revisit that theme.
Yeah. So I completely stole that, and I should have said so. So I should have attributed that to Sir George Lane, who's one of my favorite people in the NCD and global health world, and that's very much his approach. And I think it depends on, again, your audience. If you're talking to finance ministers, then you're going to primarily be pitching at the pocket on the financial angles. So it depends, but I think the heart piece is very important, that whoever you're talking to, you need to get them on board. This is where the the storytelling and the testimonies and the real life experiences come in, to help people really understand the lives of the people that you're talking about. I'm not sure in diabetes that we made much headway in some respects until we started talking about the stories of some of the children with type 1 diabetes, and started telling the real, very uncomfortable stories about parents in some countries who had a child with type 1 diabetes, and basically it was Sophie's choice for those people, that they chose to put that child on the street, because they knew that they couldn't pay the medical bills for that child, and in order to save the entire family, people would make the choice to put that child on the street. It's those sorts of stories that I think we need to tell everybody, maybe especially finance ministers. And I remember at one point I was talking to a meeting of Commonwealth finance ministers, and I was talking about maternal mortality, and I was talking to them about the numbers, and I was talking to them about the arguments, and then I talked to them about some of the the real life stories that the real life stories of women in Pakistan that I had met, who had lost their lives in childbirth, and what that had done to families, and how preventable that was. And at the end of the meeting, there was a finance minister came up to me, and he was absolutely in tears, and I thought, my God, what have I done? Anyway, his wife was pregnant, and he said, right, I get it. He said, I understand it. What is it that you want me to do in my country now? Whatever you want me to do now, advise me, because I'm going to go and do that. I get that completely now. So I think this combination of making sure that you've got your arguments straight, but backed by the heart, and also properly costed, I think it's a really good combination.
Absolutely. And that connection to a reality other than perhaps our own, I think is so valuable that you highlight in terms of the heart. So thank you. I think we have time for one last question. And you've highlighted that women can expect to be tripped up from needing to expect microaggressions, all the way to your experiences of being thrown out of many more powerful places than a lot of us have ever been. So we have a question here that says, okay, well, defining your terms is one way of advancing from failure, but it's really hard to do. And how did you get such a thick skin? And then I'll add on to that, should we have a thick skin? How do you kind of navigate thinking about that?
Yeah, I think if anybody ever described me as nice, I would be really concerned, and I would be very insulted. So I never want to be described as nice. I don't mind being described as difficult, because that's the other label for a woman, and I know I'm going to get one or the other. So I'd rather have difficult. I think we have to have a thick skin. I think there's no alternative, and I would say that comes from my family background, basically. That my grandmother was widowed. As I said, she left school at 12. She brought up 5 children in a state of tremendous poverty. I'm used to women fighting. I'm used to seeing strong women fight, because the women in my family had to fight or go under. So I think that's a lesson I learned very early on, and I wasn't raised to please other people, and I'll be polite. I hope I'll be polite. I hope I'll be friendly, but I'm also going to call people out on things if I have to, and I don't mind if people don't like me. You know, I hope some people like me. But I would hope wherever I am that there's probably going to be a balance of some people that don't like me, and hopefully a majority of people who either, you know, like me or are indifferent. So I think women have to take that approach.
Well, thank you so much. We certainly like you and have learned so much from this session today, and certainly here's to being challenging women together. So thank you for sharing this wealth of experience and knowledge with us today, Anne. I'm going to hand over now to our Women in Global Health Georgia Programs Chair, Lauren Abrams, to close the session.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. Thank you so much, Anne, for sharing your presentation and your wealth of experience with us here today. This was great. Thank you so much to everybody for joining us. And we just want to let you know that in December, we do have an exciting event coming up. So we'll be sharing more about that in the coming weeks, and we hope you'll all be able to join us. Thank you.